All right, everyone, I'm excited to welcome back to the show author Samuel Garza Bernstein. He's got another book. Oh my God, you
Another
remember
book.
another
I
book?
know.
We hung out on episode 393. We talked about his amazing book about Caesar Romero, but now, and I think we actually teased this book, the Roddy McDowall book. It's out. We're here to talk all about it. This is, I'm excited to dive in. The first of its kind on Roddy McDowall, or Roddy McDowall in the actor's life. How green was my valley, to Lassie, to Planet of the Apes. Welcome back, Samuel. Hey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Oh my God, though, the sign of the times that we're in, the day that it was released for what looked to be, shall I say, AI assisted and or written books about Roddy McDowall also appeared. And all of them have these weird generated covers that are pictures that aren't actually him. They're like sort of him, but kind of like weirdly not. And it's very pod people like. It's very strange.
That can't be a coincidence. I guess that's another one of these dangers of AI, because the book's been promoted for a long time and we talked about it a long time ago. I'm sure it's been on Amazon coming or pre-orders forever. So that's the latest AI attacks, I guess.
It is. It's a thing that's happening. I mean, I have friends who write novels and they've talked about it being this problem with things, but it hadn't until, for me anyway, until this year spread to nonfiction, where suddenly all these copycat things just sort of appear out of nowhere. Very strange.
If had I thought of it, I would have come out with a Roddy McDowall book myself. No, I mean, movies there's movie companies that do that. You know, like
Yeah.
when you used to go to Blockbuster and it would be Planet of the Monkeys, and you're like, oh, this is that one that I want
This is
everyone to
that
talk.
one. It's
Yeah.
like no.
Same kind of question I think that we started with Cesar Romero. What drew you to Roddy McDowall?
He had a tremendously impactful and important career that no one had written about before. And he also had all of these relationships with friends and colleagues that were just sort of legendary, Elizabeth Taylor, all of those stories. When I realized that, because you have conversations with your agent and publisher and editors and stuff where you're talking about possible things to write about. And when it came to my attention that nobody had written about him before, I thought, wow, that's crazy. So it turns out there was kind of this rumor that he had these archives, but that everything was locked up for 100 years. Thankfully, the first part of the rumor is true. There were archives at Boston University, hundreds of boxes of material. The second part was completely untrue, and all of it became available in 2023. I was able to access all of that information.
Did you have to ask the family to get access, or was it?
It's not, I think if you show up I'm not sure, I think at the library at Boston University, I think you sort of have to show that you have a book contract or you have a reason. The archives are very protected and in a very safe environment. And, they're not there just for casual kind of, oh, let's go look at all this stuff today. It's not like that. And so I think you have to just be a professional. There is no family. His sister never married, never had children. He never had children. And they were sort of, I wouldn't say estranged in any way, but they and their parents were just kind of their own separate little unit and were not very involved with the other extended family. So really, when his sister died, I think it was 2006, that was kind of the end.
Oh, well, I have to say, Roddy McDowall is one of my favorite actors of all time. However, I realized as I was diving into your book that I really know nothing about him, like literally nothing. Like it's like one of those where I think growing up, Planet of the Apes had such an impact on me that he just became like one of my favorite actors. And so I loved him, but I don't think I knew anything he was in before that. I mean, after, yeah, I mean, maybe Batman, Bookworm and Batman,
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
like he was in the Bug's Life, like he'd show up every now and then, like Fright Night would be another one that would pop into my head. But I realized like I didn't even know Lassie. You know what I mean? Like, like I didn't even, I mean, the TV show, I don't even think I mean, it's funny. Like there's the blind spots that I realize I had.
Well, we were both very young in 1942 when Lassie came out. So
Yes. Very, very young, very, very young. But it's amazing, like just the career he had outside of the career, assuming maybe I'm normal with this, that a lot of people even just know he had, you know what I mean? So
and it was so important. I mean, he was kind of the face of British war relief in, the early days leading up to World War II, leading up to America's involvement in World War II. Really, from a government standpoint and from the movie studio standpoint that were really supporting the government's position on this, he was this kind of vital part of convincing the American public that we really did need to support the British war effort. It really is. I mean, I like to deconstruct kind of legends about how things are, and the legend of how he came over on a refugee ship from England, and literally 6 or 7 weeks later was like starring in 20th Century Fox's most important movie of the year, is kind of, it's got all this hype to it and all of these like things, but it really is true that he got off that boat without a deal, without a studio, and somehow or other wound up starring in that movie 6 weeks later. And it's an extraordinary turn of events. And he actually, there were newspaper reporters to meet the ship. And in his memory, he conflated that, thinking that his mother had somehow gotten reporters there and that it was about him and his acting and stuff. It wasn't. It was just about British war refugees. It had nothing, they had no idea who Roddy McDowall or his sister Virginia, who they were. It had nothing to do with acting, nothing to do with 20th Century Fox. But, that memory is very, porous and changeable. And I think it just made sense to him to go, oh, well, somehow my mother must have made that happen. It wasn't the case.
how does one go from stepping off a boat to starring in such a huge movie 6 weeks later? Like,
Well, he had already been working for the British arm of 20th Century Fox. So he was not an unknown quantity. And they had this project coming up. They were able to get him, seen for that. And the thing is that everyone was so impressed by him, and they were so taken aback by this soulful little face and these giant eyes. When you go into close up, you're just like, oh my God. The movie originally was planned to be about a third of it with the little boy character, and then he would grow up to be Tyrone Power, who was 20th Century Fox's biggest star in the late 30s and early 40s. The whole thing got reworked around Roddy. Also for budgetary reasons. It's a lot cheaper to make a movie with Roddy McDowall at 12 years old than it was to make a movie with one of the most important stars on the lot. His test was directed by William Wyler, who later had to bow out and was replaced by John Ford to make the movie itself, just from scheduling problems. He tested, then he did another test, and it really was the case that everyone just fell in love with him. William Wyler and John Ford were not sentimental, easy to please people. They were very, very difficult, brash, kind of very angry directors sometimes. They just melted when they saw his test. They realized they had this possibility of making something that was very important. And MGM had already been planning Lassie Come Home because the book had already been a huge success. And they postponed shooting for 6 months so that they could get Roddy in between the 5 movies that he immediately started making at 20th Century Fox. You can watch, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You watch the movie and you just go, I don't know how he's doing what he's doing at 12 years old, but it's extraordinary, just extraordinary.
that's amazing. There was a quote right in the beginning of your book that from an interview you did with Lee Grant that said Roddy was kicked out of stardom as a child.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, he grew up. I mean, as he himself said, I had the bad taste to grow up. And he was not, there's a certain kind of adolescent that can make that transition easily, and there are some who don't. And Roddy, when he was entering adolescence, got a little awkward and gawky looking, a little unsure of himself and unsure of his powers. He was billed as 10 years old, but he was already 12 when he started making movies. He really only had a very short window of opportunity, like 3 years or so, before it was very apparent that he was no longer a child. And they put him in as many movies as they possibly could, as quickly as possible. Many of them followed a certain kind of formula in terms of his characters. So he would play somebody that embodied sort of noble ideas about the British, but who was unafraid of, like, taking his shirt off and getting into a fist fight. He would usually lose the fist fight. But, the point was to show how scrappy he is and how, like, he's unafraid of a fight. They did this in different historical periods and different stories and comedy and drama, but it was really all about we should support the British. We must support the British. It was a noble thing to be a part of, I think. And I think he was very proud of the fact that in the end, he mattered to that process. I mean, he was out himself raising war bonds, millions of dollars, selling war bonds and raising money for the war effort. It's just a curious historical moment to find yourself, however, like just this sort of linchpin of a part of it. I think that was very meaningful to him.
It's funny because like I was telling you how I know Roddy McDowall, and like I didn't even know he was a child actor. So I didn't even know like he was part of that group that then became also prominent as adults. So I learned so much. I learned so much from you.
Well, he and Elizabeth Taylor, so he was 12 and Elizabeth Taylor was 9 when they met on Lassie. These two little children were both at MGM making that movie. At the very same time, they were also shooting The White Cliffs of Dover over on the Fox lot. And Fox put out a press release trumpeting the fact that little Roddy McDowall has beaten the record at 20th Century Fox. He has worked more days in a row than anyone in the history of the studio, 126 days without a break. Really? That's bad. That's not a good thing. It's like, but I guess it was just different times. They were like, look how look how you can count on him and how great he is. Just kind of crazy.
Yeah, times were different back then. They were, and his co-star enjoys 12 packs a day of cigarettes, Marlboro, where it's like they just that was so later came the child labor laws, which would have protected him. But all right, so he was the breadwinner as well, you mentioned. If I remember correctly, didn't Caesar
Yep.
Romero? Yeah.
So did Joan Crawford, who I wrote about before Cesar Romero. I do seem to have an affinity for workaholics who support everyone.
Right. Samuel's breadwinner trilogy.
My breadwinner trilogy.
It's got to be extra hard though for like these kids to be supporting their family because that's not the normal dynamic.
No, it's not. And look, when the money ran out, which it did, he had to reinvent himself. He went to New York. He started working in, television was just getting into its infancy in the early 50s. And he did a lot of anthology, productions where he could just play all these different characters. So sometimes he would be kind of a young juvenile lead, but other times he would play like, he's a Mexican street peddler, or he's, and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I'm not sure that's how I would cast him, but that gives him a chance to flex his muscles. He created a life for himself. He fell in love. He fell in love with Montgomery Clift, and they had a very sort of tumultuous time together because of Montgomery Clift's drug and alcohol problems. But it opened his eyes to a different way of living, to a different way of working. He studied acting. He really went back to basics and said, as a child, you can rely on, the wide eyes and the close up to tell a lot of the story, but that doesn't really work when you're an adult. And he resolved to kind of go back to basics, learn technique, really study, and really hone his craft so that he could be an adult in charge of the work that he's doing rather than a child responding to everyone around him.
So, I mean, was it like just a flood of money comes in and he loses it? I mean, just, agents, taxes, whatever. Is that one of
His
those?
mother spent freely, shall we say. And the thing is, if he had kept making in the six figures forever, then the money wouldn't have run out. But they weren't saving any of the money. They were living within their means, with a lavish, entertaining schedule. They had lots of parties. Sunday afternoons, they always had huge numbers of other actors, other people at the house. All of this costs a great deal of money. During the his transition, he actually went out on the road with theater, and she would insist that he travel first class so that nobody could ever see him not being a star. So he was kind of locked into spending an enormous amount of money to keep everything sort of rolling. When his contract wasn't renewed at 20th Century Fox, suddenly the rug was pulled out from under everyone, even though it was very easy to predict that this would happen. This was not a shock that he would grow up. But I think his mother had sort of convinced herself that it just would last forever because she loved it. She loved his stardom. She loved being sort of the star of the show, the star of the party, the one that everybody, knew that would talk to everybody. She was a very big personality in her own right.
Well, I imagine he's on both sides of the pond. He's huge. So the mom must have loved, right? Because he's making all the movies, but he's also like the war, the war bonds face,
Yeah,
right? So he's got to be like for his own country, kind of a hero in that sense also. So you've got the movie star, the do good at home, so the mom must have just been cafelling over and over.
absolutely. She just, look what I made. And I mean, it was a little bit more difficult for his sister because in the beginning, they both had careers. And she would go on to do some little parts here and there throughout over the years, but she never really had a career per se. And it was very diminishing for her, I think. And Roddy was very protective of her and really tried to help as much as he could. But she had her own demons or whatever, and she did not. The business of acting was not for her at all. She didn't have a. You're a kid, and people are writing all of these things about you, good, bad, often very bad thing, and. I think it's really hard to withstand that. Look, it's hard as an adult to withstand that. It's hard to somebody just left a really crappy review of my book on Amazon. I'm like, I want to call them up and yell at them. And you can't take it that way. You can't be thin-skinned that way. But we're all, we're only human.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, in this day and age, it stings even more. And like the fact that even it could even sting back then when there was so little distribution or it took longer. Yeah,
Took
it's never.
longer.
Yeah,
It took
it's
longer. Yeah. There was a public appearance that Roddy made where I won't repeat. I don't think I'm supposed to use four-letter words here. Someone in the audience said, he was this, gosh, he must have been 13 or 14. And he's on this publicity tour and showing up at the theater to announce the movie. And it was My Friend Flicka, one of it, the Boy and His Horse movie. After his Boy and a Dog movie, he made a Boy and a Horse movie. And it was enormously popular, but some guy stood up in the back of the theater and screamed out, "Go F Flicka," and "Go F Flicka," and just kept screaming it over and over again while Roddy's just kind of going, okay. you know?
I know, what do you do, right? But I mean, it's interesting as you pointed out, like that Roddy understood that he had to bring himself through this transition from a child actor to an adult actor and to learn. And then he wins a Tony, right? I mean, he's like, he
He
does
wins a
well.
Tony, he wins an Emmy, he creates a huge theater career, a huge television career. You know, inarguably is central to one of the most successful film franchises in history, Planet of the Apes. And it wasn't just that he showed up on set and did his work. He also became this almost ambassador for the films themselves, but also for helping all of the other actors work in the prosthetics that they had to wear, you know, to play apes and chimpanzees. It was very difficult. You didn't, just because you felt something that would have, you know, with your skin, with your regular face, would have communicated an emotion. Well, you're not going to communicate an emotion through all those layers of prosthetics. He really kind of worked out methods of moving those prosthetics around in ways that would indicate certain emotional movement, feelings, you know, ideas, whatever. And he would have these little sessions where he would train the other actors how to do it. And nobody asked him to do that. It was just he was like helping if people wanted his help. And but of course the most important thing was that they all learned how to smoke because smoking was very big back then. So, you know, there are all these pictures from, you know, backstage where they're all like with long cigarette holders kind of maneuvering them in through the prosthetic openings so that they can all smoke.
It's so funny. Yeah, those movies, remember just running home after school watching, Planet of the Apes week. There was Godzilla week, there was Planet of the Apes week, that kind of stuff. I mean, they're all amazing, but like he did stick out so much. And it was just like, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, how I, fell in love with him as an actor and just thinking he was the coolest thing ever, you know.
I mean, it is such a huge part of his legacy and one that he embraced. You know, he didn't look at it as like a bother if somebody wanted to talk about it or somebody, you know, a fan came up or something. He just was very proud of that. And even as he died not incoincidentally of lung cancer. In the last sort of 6 months of his life, he was really increasingly in a lot of pain, but he still participated. That was in 1998. It was the 30th anniversary of Planet of the Apes, and he was everywhere at those celebrations promoting the franchise and promoting the legacy of the franchise. He went to London, he went to New York, he went to LA. I mean, he was on daily IV of morphine at this point, and he still kind of showed up and did his work, and that's really what mattered the most to him.
Yeah, it wasn't like, I think till years later, because like I watched the movies, but I'm young, so I didn't realize like he was. And if you look at the TV show, he's like multiple characters. Actually, he's
Yeah,
different. Like, yeah, he plays like his own.
multiple characters.
Yeah,
He was his own son.
yeah.
And although he was, for the second one, he was off shooting his directorial debut, a movie called Tam Lin, starring Ava Gardner in 1970. But he's still in the movie, though, because they use a voiceover narration at the top of the movie, and it's him. So as far as I'm concerned, he's in all of those pictures, not just and I count the second one too, even though in the regular action of the film, a different actor is in the chimpanzee suit. But he has a voice that sounds a lot like Roddy, and I don't think the audience quite understood that it wasn't him, which
I
was
don't
the
think I
intention.
understood it was him until just now. Sequels weren't like I mean, that was like a newer thing. Like they didn't
It
do sequel after sequel
was.
after sequel. I mean, there was four
Well,
sequels to the first one, right? I mean,
it was four sequels, and really, I think, relatively unprecedented in film history. They all stand up. I mean, the last one is a little bit on fumes, but still, even the fifth one, it really stands on its own. It holds up. I think both from a writing and directing standpoint, but also from an acting standpoint, the franchise had the great good luck of having creative people involved who really cared. sometimes with projects like that, you would find people just sort of hitting their marks and kind of phoning it in a little bit, particularly by the fifth film in a franchise. You could imagine people being a little blasé about it, but no one was ever blasé. But I think it was hard to be blasé around Roddy. It's almost like he wouldn't allow it. He was so on it and curious and interested and present. And I think it encouraged other people to be very present as well.
That is excellent insight. Thank you. So, all right. So he did that. He did the TV show. But the other Rod Serling, if we count Planet of the Apes as Rod Serling, I
Yeah.
mean, he was in one of the premiere
Twilight
landmark
Zone,
episodes of the Twilight Zone too.
as well as the pilot of Night Gallery.
Yes. It's funny, like as much as I love Rod Serling, I've never seen Night Gallery. Like I'm obsessed with the Twilight Zone. It's half my bookshelf. For some reason I have never seen Night Gallery.
You must see the pilot for Night Gallery. That's also the one where Steven Spielberg directed Joan Crawford, the rich woman who gets somebody's eyes for one
Eyes,
night.
yeah.
It's both of those. There's three episodes, and the third one is a World War II Nazi one that I find a little bit more, I don't know, a little by the numbers. But the Joan Crawford one and the Roddy McDowall one with Ossie Davis, they're just brilliant. And when we hang up here, you must go watch that immediately.
I will. And then he was in a lot of like Batman. I mean, I think it was only in 2 or 3 episodes of Batman, like
Just
as
the
the
one.
bookworm. Of just
Just
one?
the one.
Why did I
Yeah.
think it was at least two? I figured they used at least everyone twice.
Well, I think, the bookworm wasn't really a big villain back then. Later, I mean, if you're a fan of, the ongoing Batman saga, then the bookworm becomes a very important villain as the years go by with his own backstory and a whole kind of really psychotic kind of story. But in Batman 66, the TV series, no, he was just there once. Although he and Caesar together were shooting Roddy's episode when Prince Philip visited from the United Kingdom, and he wanted to see the Batman set, as you do. So they brought Caesar in because he specifically wanted to meet the Joker as well. So this is the only time I ever know of Caesar Romero and Roddy McDowall working together, was just on this showing Prince Philip around the Batman sets on the 20th Century Fox lot. It's just kind of, what a strange life, people lead for this to be this moment in time in 1967 when this meeting happens.
Maybe I'm thinking like, didn't they always split the episodes? Like,
Yes.
yeah, maybe that's why I'm thinking like two.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
That's fair
Yeah.
to say. Yes, it is 2 episodes because it's at the end of episode
Right.
one, he's winning. The villain's always the Cape Crusaders are gonna die, and the villains are gonna win. And then of course you get the next episode, and then it turns and
Right. Yeah. And then he gets a Hollywood Walk of Fame, and like it's picking back up. It's right. I mean, that's you kind of like talk about in the book, like how it kind of nosedives with the money, and then kind of the reinvention, and kind of starts to do some
well,
cool stuff. And
if you're going to have, I mean, really, his work began in 1938. It ended in 1998. 60 years from the age of 10 to the age of 70. He was working nonstop. That doesn't happen as an actor unless you're conscious of trying out new things and reinventing what it is that you think you can do and where it is that you think you can do it. I have no doubt if he were alive right now, he would be all over social media. He would be making little TikTok videos. He would have been all over it because he was curious about the world and curious about the business as it changed and as it, became different things, as home video became, part of the process, as theater took on more and more aspects of film where you had, visuals and multimedia things. The last production that he did was A Christmas Carol at Madison Square Garden Theater. And, this was something that would have been impossible to achieve from a staging standpoint in the theater that he knew as a little boy, because it became this whole sort of multimedia event. And he embraced all of that. He just thought it was exciting to see what was going to come up next, what was going to be new tomorrow.
Well, one question I had for you, there was the FBI raid, because you talked about like how he protected the movies and collected movies and like to preserve them, but then the FBI raided him.
It is not a very nice reflection on the movie studios to say, to remark that they were so wasteful in their day, where they never imagined that the old films, that their classic libraries would really matter, and they did nothing to protect them. I mean, there are time and time again, there are incidents where, oh, well, that warehouse of all those films from, the 1932-33 season, we need that space for something else, so just go burn those. They treated film as if it was disposable, and Roddy was very distressed about that, very angered about that. And he sought to preserve as much as he could through private collecting. Now, the other side of the studio system, though, is that while they may have been very wasteful about what they owned, they were very clear that they owned it. So if somebody else had a copy of it, that was copyright infringement, and that was terrible. And so they didn't want to take care of their films, but they really wanted to punish anybody else who did. I mean, mainly because they didn't want people profiting off of their copyrighted material, which fair enough. But, Roddy was not doing that. He had a huge collection, and the FBI did confiscate everything, but they did give it all back. And they didn't charge him with anything. They realized that it was exactly as he said, that he was collecting these films in order to preserve them. He made no money off it. It cost him a fortune to do, and that was one of the reasons why, as an adult, he was always working, because he was putting his money into things like preserving film. He also, he was a photographer, and he came out with a series of books that were photographs that he took of famous people, and then other people would write essays about them. So you'd get, like a famous director writing about a famous actor or something like that. And all of the proceeds went to the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which they run the country home, where for retired actors and performers. Even as a child, it's like he was a very wise old person, even as a little boy. He knew that one day he would be old. Like he understood that even when he was 12 and 13 and 14. And he thought it was important to preserve the memory and to help preserve the people themselves as they aged and could no longer care for themselves.
That's an amazing person. It's amazing just how much did you know? How much of this did you know? And then like, how much of it did you learn? Or like, when I say no, obviously you didn't know everything you should, but like had inklings of, you know what I mean? Then
I knew about his career. Even as a child, I was steeped in, Hollywood history. So, I was 6 and 7 and 8 and looking at pictures of Joan Crawford and going, who's that? So I knew about the importance of his work. I did not know all that much about his life. I mean, I knew he was friends with Elizabeth Taylor. I knew, things like that. But I didn't really understand how he was connected kind of to everybody. And I think that's why we've been getting an extraordinary outpouring of quotes from people who knew him. People like Dame Julie Andrews and Carol Burnett and Emma Thompson and Dolly Parton and, people who are supportive of him and of the book and getting his story out there because they loved him. And, when he knew Emma Thompson, she was in her 20s and new to Hollywood. He walked Ileana Douglas down the aisle at her wedding. and he met her when she was in her 20s. He was curious about the next generation. Like I said before, it's like there was always a sense for him about, well, but what's coming next? How do we involve those people? And how do we get them? You know, Johnny Depp is sitting in Roddy McDowall's living room and having dinner with him while Gregory Peck is telling Johnny Depp, well, this is how I managed to keep a career going for 40 years. You know, because Johnny Depp was 25 and thinking like, you know, I'm going to make my first movie. What am I going to do? You know, what is my career going to be like? How do I, you know, become like Gregory Peck or like Roddy McDowall? He was a bridge between generations, between industries, between countries.
So all these secrets that he didn't write any of them down.
Um,
I mean, they're not
Certainly
in
he
the
wrote some.
archives. Like you didn't read them and go, hmm.
You know, I did not print everything that I read. Sometimes people are being private with one another and they say things that are intemperate or unkind. I mean, really, if there was something that I think could make Roddy McDowall come back and haunt me from the grave, it would be if I had printed some of the unkind things that he might say, you know, in an offhand manner in a letter to somebody about somebody's performance or something. That was never meant to be public, and it was never meant to hurt anybody's feelings. It was like when you leave a party and you and your partner are in the car and you're talking about how much you hated that one guy at the party. You know, that's not for anybody else to know, you know, and so no, I didn't print everything that I uncovered. I printed what I felt was could illuminate Roddy's life and the purpose of his life as much as possible. I didn't really want to write something that went into the weeds of kind of being sort of tacky.
That's what's great about the way you approach books that you write. It's like, you know, the mission that you're out for. You're not there for like the quick soundbite that's gonna.
Well, I mean, yeah, you think about some of the not nice things that you've said over the years in private. You know, even if you have an archive, maybe you forgot that that thing in that letter was in that archive. Like, you know, I don't think any of us would want all of our private thoughts, you know, written about or broadcast.
What was like the one thing that did make the book that was of the positive nature that you read and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know this. And like, you know, what I mean, like you're like, oh, this is it.
Well, I mean, for me, as a gay man myself, I was thrilled to realize how relatively open he was able to be I mean, there's correspondence in the late 50s with the studios, with the networks, with agents, with publicists that all acknowledged his partners. You know, when he was seeing a partner named John, the exec at 20th Century Fox would be like, you know, give my love to John. He sent me the funniest card the other day. He's, you know, I love him. You know, just the absolute normalization of his private life, I just think is wonderful. I think it's wonderful for his life. I think it's wonderful in historical terms that we can look back and realize, you know, people still found a way to live authentic lives, even when you couldn't, you know, sort of publicly name the relationship. But he really he lived authentically. I love that for him.
That is amazing. I wanted to ask what your favorite Roddy McDowall performances were or are. You can pick one, you
Oh
can pick
God.
two. But I also wanted to kind of acknowledge, while you're thinking about that, acknowledge the fact that he had quite a voiceover career. I
Oh
mean, he had a
yeah.
great voice, but I mean, like, you know, like I know him from Bug's Life, but as I was looking at his IMDb, he did a lot of voiceover work.
I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's about 875 appearances on television. That's a lot of times. You
Yeah.
know, well,
He was
maybe
the
appearance isn't the
devil
right
on
way. It's
Fantasy
in
Island.
sports. He was the devil on Fantasy in multiple, I think 2 or 3 episodes, and also did 1 or 2 more, and the other spelling shows. You know, did Love Boat and Hotel and Heart to Heart. He was in the pilot for Heart to Heart. He got around. I think Some of my favorite performances, look, you can't, I mean, How Green Was My Valley won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1941. He is the heart and soul of the film. He breaks your heart. You know, he absolutely breaks your heart. You can just pick and choose, jump anywhere in the movie. There's a scene with him in it. He's breaking your heart. He's so good at it. I love him in Cleopatra. He plays Octavian Caesar, and he has sort of a big storyline in the third act of the movie. I think he was wonderful in that. I love him in Fright Night, but I also love him in some of the movies that didn't work out so well. There's a 1966 movie called Lord Love a Duck, where he's playing an anarchic kind of sociopath, murderous high school student. And he's just wonderful in it. I mean, it's kind of hit or miss, and it was a real box office bomb in its moment. But I think he's really, really wonderful in it. He also, he shows up on, well, I was going to say Night Gallery was one of my favorite performances of his. He plays the heir to a fortune who kills off his uncle to get it, is then sort of haunted into madness and killed himself. I think he's wonderful in that. And also a performance that I love is in Overboard, the Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell movie. He plays the butler, and he's kind of the human element that connects Goldie Hawn's character to like who she was and then who she becomes. And Roddy set that movie up. He was the executive producer of that film too.
Amazing. He did so much, and you captured it all. His essence. Everybody go get this book. You've got great background game for those watching on YouTube. You can see your background is great. The Roddy McDowall, An Actor's Life, How Green Was My Valley, to Lassie, to Planet of the Apes. Available now everywhere. Get it on Amazon.
Everywhere. All over the galaxy. Everywhere.
Everywhere. Thanks. What's that? You got one on coming up? You got another book in the hopper?
I do. Well, I have two things coming up. I've just written all of the episodes for the fourth season of an Amazon show called After Forever. And so we're going to be shooting that later this year. And I have a book that I'm supposed to be writing. I haven't started yet, about Eartha Kitt.
Oh, as you said that, two AI Eartha Kitt books popped up.
Oh, you're kidding? No.
Yeah, of course I'm kidding.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, I misunderstood.
Callback. That was a callback. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you should do all the. Was she the breadwinner of her family? If she wasn't, don't write it.
She absolutely was.
Okay.
And became the breadwinner when she was like 15 years old.
Then I give it my blessing.
But we're going to have the same artist who did the Caesar poster is going to do her as Catwoman for the book cover.
Then I think you need a special edition Roddy McDowall where you do him as Bookworm. Like once you have three, right? Like
but the third one is going to be Burgess Meredith as the Penguin.
Oh my God! So Roddy would be the fourth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Roddy wasn't as defined by the Batman thing.
No, he wasn't at all. 100% no. But once you got a theme going, Samuel, it's like you got to have a special edition version, of it. Like even if it's just for you,
I'll get right on.
Even if it's just for me. You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.